Every emotion we refuse to understand becomes a ghost that follows us. Hatred is one of those ghosts. It appears to be about the other person, their arrogance, their cruelty, their ignorance. But if you look long enough, if you strip away the noise, you find that hatred always points inward. Jung saw this with unsettling clarity. He wrote that we do not see others as they are, but as we are. The people who provoke us most are rarely strangers to our soul. They carry something of our own disowned nature, a fragment of the self that was banished long ago into the dark corners of the psyche. When you hate someone, you are meeting an aspect of yourself that you cannot bear to face. The intensity of emotion is a measure of your disconnection from it. That person becomes a screen onto which your unconscious projects the image of your own rejected qualities. You call them selfish because you cannot accept your own hunger. You call them weak because you fear your own vulnerability. You call them arrogant because somewhere in you, the desire for power has been chained and shamed. Hatred is projection at its most violent. It is the psyche's desperate attempt to separate itself from what it refuses to acknowledge. The more you disown, the more violently you judge. It begins innocently. We learn from childhood what is acceptable and what is forbidden. We learn which feelings are praised and which are punished. Anger, envy, pride, lust, fear, each is wrapped in shame and pushed into the basement of the soul. The more good we try to be, the larger the shadow grows. And one day when we meet someone who embodies what we've repressed, the shadow comes to life. We don't see a human being. We see a threat to our carefully curated identity. Jung called this confrontation the meeting with the shadow. It is one of the most difficult experiences a person can have because it demands humility. It asks you to admit that the darkness you perceive outside is also within you. Most people never do this. They prefer to live inside the illusion of purity, attacking in others what they secretly fear in themselves. The world then becomes a stage of mirrors. We walk through it surrounded by reflections of our inner conflicts. Every judgment is a revelation disguised as opinion. Every irritation, a message from the unconscious saying, "Look here, this too is you." But instead of looking, we turn away. We talk about justice, morality, boundaries, words that sound noble but often hide our refusal to feel. Hatred gives us energy. It makes us feel righteous. It distracts us from the quiet truth that our war with the world is only the echo of an older war within. To hate another is to declare war on what you have not yet accepted in yourself. It is self-rejection disguised as virtue. And yet there is a strange mercy hidden inside hatred. If you follow it inward, if you have the courage to trace it back to its source, it will show you the exact place where love stopped flowing. The people we hate are the gatekeepers of our most disowned humanity. Hatred, then, is not the end of understanding. It is the beginning. It is the psyche's way of saying, there is something here you need to see. You don't have to forgive yet. You don't have to understand yet. Just notice how your hatred speaks your name. Every time you say, "I can't stand this in them," listen closely. Something inside is whispering, "You can't stand this in yourself." The mirror never lies. Projection is one of the oldest defense mechanisms in the human psyche. It is the invisible bridge between the inner world and the outer world, a bridge we cross unconsciously every day. Jung described it as the process by which we transfer our own unconscious contents onto others so that we may perceive outside what we cannot tolerate within. The psyche has a peculiar logic. It prefers distortion to awareness. When an impulse or emotion is too painful, too shameful, or too threatening to be owned, the mind quietly expels it. It doesn't disappear. It finds a host. It takes shape as the trait we despise in another person, the pattern we condemn, the flaw we swear we don't have. We say she's so manipulative, but we overlook how subtly we control. We say he's full of himself, while secretly craving the same confidence. We say they're dishonest, while hiding the ways we betray our own truth. Projection is the mind's way of defending the fragile identity we've built. The ego survives by defining what it is and what it is not. The not is what becomes the shadow. Everything you reject is sent into exile, but exile doesn't mean erasure. The shadow keeps moving beneath the surface, waiting for an image, a person, or a situation through which to reappear. When it does, you call it enemy. Jung noticed that the energy we invest in judgment is proportional to the energy of our disowned qualities. The stronger the emotional reaction, the clearer the sign that something personal is being touched. What outrages you reveals what you repress. What fascinates you reveals what you lack. The world is your unconscious rendered visible. Most people spend their lives entangled in this web of projections. We build relationships on them, build nations on them, even build gods on them. We create external saviors and devils so we can avoid seeing the divine and the demonic within. The collective shadow, Jung warned, is far more dangerous than the personal one, because when an entire group disowns its darkness, it becomes capable of cruelty under the banner of virtue. The mechanism is always the same. First, repression. A feeling or instinct is denied. Then, projection. It returns in disguise, embodied by someone else. Finally, reaction. We attack, reject, or moralize against the very thing we secretly carry. To dismantle this cycle requires extraordinary honesty. It means asking uncomfortable questions. Why does this person irritate me so much? What does my judgment protect? What emotion am I avoiding by focusing on their flaws? At first, the answers are humiliating. They destabilize the ego's narrative of goodness. But slowly, the humiliation becomes illumination. You begin to realize that your projections were never moral failures. They were attempts at balance. The psyche was trying to show you what was missing. Every projection contains a fragment of your lost wholeness. The people you hate and the people you admire are both mirrors. Hatred shows you the qualities you deny. Admiration shows you the qualities you have not yet embodied. The task of consciousness is to withdraw these projections, to recognize what belongs to you and reclaim it. Jung said that each withdrawal of a projection is a small piece of immortality regained. He meant that every time you stop blaming the outer world, you free a portion of your soul from exile. You begin to see others as they are, not as extensions of your own inner conflicts. Compassion replaces reaction. Curiosity replaces judgment. The psychology of projection, then, is not about guilt. It's about responsibility, the ability to respond consciously rather than unconsciously. When you see your hatred as reflection, not truth, you cease to feed it. The image dissolves, and what remains is understanding. In the end, projection is how the soul speaks when we refuse to listen, and awareness is how we finally learn its language. The shadow is born the moment we learn that certain parts of us are unacceptable. It begins quietly, almost invisibly in childhood, the first time a parent, teacher, or friend frowns at something spontaneous and alive within us. A word, a gesture, a burst of emotion that doesn't fit the rules. We feel the warmth of approval when we are good and the chill of disapproval when we are not. Without realizing it, we start to divide ourselves. We begin to choose. We keep what earns love and bury what threatens it. We show what brings praise and hide what brings punishment. That's how the shadow is formed, not out of evil, but out of exile. It is composed of everything that once belonged to us and no longer feels safe to express. The anger we swallowed, the envy we denied, the longing we were told was wrong. By the time we reach adulthood, the division is complete. We have become a collection of fragments pretending to be whole. The persona, our social face, walks the world while the rest of us waits in the dark. Jung saw this as the central tragedy of modern life. Civilization demands conformity, but the soul demands wholeness. The more we try to become acceptable, the more the psyche compensates by hiding its forbidden qualities. The result is an internal tension, a constant pressure from below, as if something wild were trying to breathe through the cracks of our perfection. We are taught to fear that wildness. We call it weakness, sin, danger. But in truth, it is vitality. The shadow is not only the home of what we repress, it is also the reservoir of what we have yet to live. It contains our unlived potential as much as our unwanted flaws. Our creativity, sexuality, intuition, and power often sleep there, waiting to be reclaimed. The process begins early. When a child's anger is scolded instead of understood, it becomes shadow. When curiosity is mocked, it becomes shadow. When tears are shamed, they retreat underground. These buried elements do not disappear. They gather energy. They form a second self that grows in silence, accumulating all that the conscious self rejects. Later in adulthood, this second self announces itself through projection, addiction, obsession, or depression. It manifests as the people we can't stand, the patterns we can't break, the desires we can't confess. It speaks through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through symptoms. The shadow does not rest until it is recognized. Jung warned that the greater the light of consciousness, the darker the shadow that follows. Moral perfection breeds inner hypocrisy. The person who insists on being only good becomes haunted by what they deny. This is why we often see virtue and vice living side by side in the same heart. The stronger the mask, the more turbulent the unseen self behind it. But the birth of the shadow is not a curse. It is part of the design. The psyche evolves through polarity. It needs contrast to grow. Without shadow, there is no depth, only surface. Without confrontation, no consciousness. The question is not how to eliminate the shadow, but how to relate to it. To deny it is to remain divided. To romanticize it is to become possessed by it. To meet it consciously is to become whole. The first step toward that meeting is humility, the willingness to admit that you are not only what you wish to be, that within you lives everything you've judged, feared, or condemned. The murderer, the coward, the liar, the saint, the child, all of them share the same house. When you can look at yourself without flinching, when you can say, yes, that too is me, the shadow begins to soften. It no longer needs to scream through the faces of others. It becomes part of your language instead of your fate. Every shadow began as something innocent that was banished. To meet it is not to become dark, but to become real. Judgment is one of the ego's most elegant disguises. It looks like morality, sounds like clarity, and feels like power. When we judge, we stand above the world. We separate ourselves from what we condemn. The more we judge, the more certain we feel. Certain that we are right, clean, different. But beneath that certainty lies fear. Fear that the same impulses we condemn in others might also live in us. Fear that the border between good and evil is thinner than we pretend. Judgment is how the ego builds its fortress. Every accusation becomes a brick, every outrage another layer of defense against the chaos within. Jung understood this mechanism deeply. He wrote that the moral attitude, though necessary, can easily become a mask for repression. When the ego identifies with virtue, the shadow becomes more vicious. The brighter the self-image, the darker the hidden truth that sustains it. A saint who cannot acknowledge his own shadow inevitably becomes a hypocrite, not by intention but by necessity. The psyche balances extremes. Judgment begins as a thought, I would never do that. Then it becomes an emotion. Disgust, anger, disdain. Then slowly it becomes identity. I am not like them. At that point, judgment ceases to be observation and becomes refuge. We hide inside it. It protects us from seeing that our condemnation is often a confession. The very intensity of our reaction reveals how personal it is. We cannot bear to face certain truths about ourselves, so we exile them into the world and call them wrong. The ego thrives on comparison. It defines itself by difference. I am the one who doesn't lie. I am the one who controls desire. I am the one who sees clearly while others are blind. But these statements, repeated enough, become walls around the soul. They keep us safe from shame, but also from growth. To step beyond judgment is terrifying because it means stepping beyond superiority. Without someone to look down upon, who are we? The collapse of judgment feels like a collapse of identity. Yet this collapse is the beginning of maturity. The moment you stop needing to be better, you start to become real. Jung often warned of what he called inflation of consciousness, the danger of identifying with light rather than learning to carry it. The ego that believes itself enlightened is far more dangerous than the ego that knows it is small. When you judge, you inflate. When you reflect, you integrate. Judgment is seductive because it offers a false sense of control. It simplifies a complex world into binaries, good and bad, us and them, right and wrong. But life is not binary. The human heart is a spectrum. The same hand that harms can heal. The same mouth that lies can speak truth. We are all mixtures of shadow and light, and pretending otherwise keeps us trapped in projection. To live without judgment does not mean to live without discernment. It means to see without hatred, to perceive without condemnation. Judgment divides, understanding unites. When you stop hiding behind moral certainty, you begin to see how similar you are to the ones you despise. Their flaws become mirrors, not threats. Their ignorance becomes an invitation to recognize your own. Slowly, compassion begins to replace arrogance. That is the moment when hatred loses its fuel. The shadow once feared becomes a source of humility. You realize that morality was never about being pure, it was about being conscious. True ethics arises not from rejection of the dark, but from awareness of it. The ego builds walls. The soul builds bridges. And every time you choose understanding over judgment, you cross one. There comes a moment when the projection can no longer hold. You have judged, resisted, and condemned, but the energy you have spent on the outer world begins to turn inward. The person you hated fades from view, and what remains is the emotion itself, raw, wordless, unanchored. It no longer has a face. It has become a mirror. That is when the shadow steps forward. It does not come as a monster, though you may see it that way at first. It comes as a presence, familiar, wounded, persistent. You recognize its eyes. You have seen them before, in every person you rejected. They are your own. Jung described this encounter as the turning point of the inner journey. The psyche, he said, demands balance, and what is repressed must eventually be faced. The enemy we fight outside is the part of the soul seeking reconciliation within. When we refuse that meeting, we remain divided. When we accept it, we begin to heal. At first, there is resistance. The ego cannot tolerate the idea that the hated one and the self are the same. It argues, I am nothing like them. It searches for difference, for proof, for moral distance. But something deeper in you already knows. The hatred is too precise, too personal, too alive. It has your fingerprints on it. You start to see flashes of the truth. The arrogance you despise in another was your own hunger for significance. The manipulation you condemned was your own wish to control. The coldness you accused others of was your own fear of vulnerability. Slowly, the lines blur. The enemy loses shape. The war collapses. There is grief in this recognition. To see your reflection in the one you called enemy is to lose the safety of opposition. Hatred, for all its violence, provided clarity. Now that clarity dissolves. You begin to sense the loneliness that hatred was protecting you from, the pain beneath the armor. This is the heart of shadow work, the courage to look at yourself without the filter of righteousness, to admit that the same darkness lives in you, waiting not for punishment but for understanding. Jung wrote that meeting the shadow is like meeting a brother you once betrayed. You cannot embrace him without first feeling the shame of what you denied. That shame is sacred. It is the first step toward integration. When you stop projecting, the energy that was trapped in judgment returns to you. It becomes available for consciousness. You feel lighter, not because the darkness has vanished, but because it is finally yours to hold. Hatred turns to insight. The enemy turns to teacher. You begin to see that every person who wounded you was carrying their own shadow, just as you carried yours. You realize that you were never fighting each other, only the parts of yourselves that both refuse to see. It is in this realization that compassion is born. Not pity, but understanding. Compassion is not softness. It is clarity without division. You see the other's darkness and your own, and you no longer need to draw a line between them. This encounter does not make you innocent. It makes you whole. The ego, confronted with its mirror, begins to crumble, and something wider awakens behind it. A presence that can hold both sides, that can contain both love and hatred without breaking. That presence is the self. When you meet the inner enemy, you meet the beginning of unity. You realize that the darkness you feared was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to bring you home. Understanding does not come as a sudden revelation. It arrives slowly, like light filtering through heavy clouds. At first you resist it, because true understanding dismantles everything the ego built to protect itself. Hatred was easier. It had direction, purpose, a clear target. Understanding has none. It asks you to stand in uncertainty, to feel what you used to fight. Jung wrote that integration begins when consciousness can hold contradiction without splitting. This is what happens as hatred softens. The line between victim and perpetrator begins to fade. You see that you too have hurt others while trying to protect yourself. That your pride and fear have caused pain equal to the pain you once blamed on them. The more honestly you see this, the quieter you become. This quietness is not resignation. It is the birth of humility. The understanding that good and evil are not armies at war but forces seeking balance. You no longer ask who is right. You begin to ask what is real. In that question, something inside you begins to shift. The energy that once fueled anger now turns into attention. You look at people differently. Instead of seeing enemies, you see complexity. The person who insulted you is no longer a symbol of malice but a human being moving through their own confusion. You still see their shadow, but you also see their fear. You see their longing for meaning, their struggle to be seen, the same struggles that live in you. When hatred transforms, empathy follows naturally. Empathy is not forgiveness, it is recognition. You recognize yourself in others, not only in their light but in their darkness. This recognition dissolves separation. It doesn't erase boundaries, but it removes illusion. You can still disagree, still act, still protect what matters, but the inner war is over. The integration of hatred does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You stop reacting from old wounds and start responding from awareness. You can say no without contempt. You can set limits without rage. Your strength is no longer derived from opposition but from clarity. Jung called this process the transmutation of affect. The raw energy of emotion, when held consciously, changes its nature. What once burned as anger becomes the fire of insight. What once froze as resentment melts into understanding. The same force that destroyed now illuminates. It is not the emotion that poisons us, but our refusal to feel it consciously. Hatred, when owned and examined, loses its poison. It reveals its purpose, to draw attention to the parts of ourselves that need light. You realize that every emotion, even the darkest, is an instrument of awareness. The psyche never works against itself. It only becomes dangerous when ignored. When you see hatred in this way, it stops being an enemy and becomes a signal, a call to integration. This is not a moral achievement. It is psychological maturity. The moralist says, I must not hate. The conscious person says, I will understand my hatred. One denies, the other transforms. And transformation, Jung reminds us, always involves paradox. You do not conquer hatred by erasing it. You redeem it by listening. The emotion remains, but its meaning changes. It becomes transparent, almost sacred, a reminder of the unity beneath all conflict. When understanding deepens, love appears. Not sentimental love, but the kind that holds everything without needing it to change. You begin to see that hatred was love distorted by fear. It wanted connection but could not bear vulnerability. When the fear dissolves, love returns to its original form. Quiet, firm, unconditioned. In that moment, you understand. The opposite of hatred is not affection, but awareness. Awareness is what turns separation into sight. And sight, once restored, changes everything. When you stop projecting, the world becomes quieter. You begin to see people as they are, not as extensions of your own story. Their flaws no longer provoke the old reflex of judgment. Their virtues no longer awaken envy. The noise of comparison fades. What remains is clarity, a sense of seeing directly without distortion. This is what Jung called the liberation of wholeness. It is not the triumph of goodness over evil, but the reconciliation of both within the same heart. You realize that every quality you once divided into light and dark belongs to the same organism, to the same living consciousness seeking expression through you. The shadow was never separate from the self. It was the self misunderstood. The person who accepts their own darkness becomes free. They no longer need to perform virtue because they understand that virtue imposed is hypocrisy, while virtue lived from awareness is simply truth. When you accept your aggression, it becomes assertiveness. When you accept your envy, it becomes aspiration. When you accept your fear, it becomes sensitivity. Everything that was once condemned finds a new place in the whole. Freedom is not the absence of shadow. Freedom is relationship with it. You carry your darkness consciously, like a lantern whose light is fed by the same fire that once burned you. You stop trying to be pure, and you start trying to be real. The ego, when integrated, becomes a tool of expression rather than defense. It no longer hides from the unconscious, but cooperates with it. This cooperation creates inner peace, the kind that does not depend on circumstances. Life still changes, people still disappoint, pain still visits, but none of it feels like violation. You can meet it all with presence because nothing inside you is at war. Jung often said that the goal of life is not perfection but wholeness. Perfection divides, wholeness unites. The perfected person is brittle, always protecting an image. The whole person is flexible, capable of contradiction, of laughter after tears, of wisdom born from failure. Wholeness is not what saves you from humanity. It is what makes you fully human. In this liberation, relationships transform. You no longer seek others to complete you, but to share awareness. Love ceases to be possession. It becomes recognition. You recognize the same light and shadow moving through everyone, the same unfinished story playing through countless forms. Compassion ceases to be effort. It becomes perception. Even conflict becomes meaningful. You see that each disagreement is not an attack but a meeting of different fragments of the same totality. The world is no longer a battlefield. It is a conversation among mirrors. The hatred that once consumed you now reveals itself as energy waiting to be used for creation, for expression, for life itself. You begin to live with a kind of inner gravity, a stillness that holds everything. You no longer collapse under guilt or inflate with pride. Both have lost their function. You are not superior to others, nor are you beneath them. You simply are. That simplicity is what the ego feared most, because it cannot control it. But simplicity is not emptiness. It is fullness freed from fragmentation. When you no longer divide life into good and bad, mine and yours, right and wrong, you begin to sense the underlying unity of existence. The same force that gives birth to the stars is breathing through you. Wholeness, once glimpsed, cannot be forgotten. It leaves a trace in the soul, a quiet certainty that everything, even the darkest, belongs to the same pattern of meaning. The shadow you once fought becomes the companion that keeps you honest. The light you once chased becomes the awareness that never leaves. And when you look at the world now, you no longer see enemies. You see stories. You see the same journey unfolding in every face. Denial, projection, collapse, awakening. You realize that the work you did inside yourself was never just for you. Each piece of consciousness you reclaimed contributes to the collective. The world changes in proportion to your own integration. This is the liberation of wholeness, to live without disguise, without self-hatred, without the need to divide, to look at your reflection, at others, at life itself, and finally say, I see it all, and it's all me. If you have followed this far, you already know that shadow work is not about self-improvement. It is not about becoming better, brighter, or more acceptable. It is about becoming whole. The journey through hatred, judgment, and projection is not a descent into sin. It is a return to truth. Every emotion you resisted, every person who provoked you, every experience you wished away, they were all teachers pointing to the parts of yourself you had forgotten to love. Carl Jung believed that the greatest act of courage is self-confrontation. He spent his life mapping the terrain of the psyche so that we could walk through our darkness without being destroyed by it. He wanted us to see that what we call evil is often unlived life, and that what we call good is merely the courage to live consciously. So if these words found you at a moment when anger consumes you, when resentment blinds you, when you cannot stand the face of another human being, pause, look again. The emotion is real, but its target is not out there. It is the signal of something unclaimed within. Do not rush to forgive. Do not rush to transcend. Begin by understanding. Sit with the discomfort until it speaks. Ask it what it is protecting. Ask it what it needs. Hatred, when listened to, becomes honesty. Judgment, when examined, becomes discernment. The wall between you and the world becomes a mirror. That is how transformation begins, not in light, but in the willingness to see clearly. When you accept what you are, even the parts that terrify you, the war ends. You stop demanding purity from yourself and others. You stop turning pain into blame. The energy once spent on rejection becomes available for creation, for presence, for love that no longer needs to divide the world into right and wrong. If this reflection has spoken to you, if it stirred something silent in the back of your mind, then perhaps you have already begun the work Jung called individuation, the slow, patient unfolding of the whole self. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like if the words stayed with you. Share this with someone who stands where you once stood, in conflict, in fear, in resistance. Not to preach, but to remind them that every act of hatred hides a cry for wholeness. This space exists for those who are ready to see, not to escape their darkness, but to walk through it consciously. Together we descend, not to drown, but to recover what was lost, the forgotten soul that waits behind the mask. When the video ends, let silence remain for a moment. Feel the weight of your breath. That stillness you sense is not emptiness. It is awareness. Your oldest companion, the one who has been watching since before the story of you began. The next time hatred rises, let that awareness speak first. Look at what it shows you. And when you recognize yourself in the face of the other, smile. That is the end of the illusion of separation. That is where the real work begins.